Ladies and gentlemen, the next two panels are going to be of much interest today as well as in the future. We have Ambassador Ong, who is the Executive Director of Rajaratnam School of International Studies with us. He's also been the Secretary General of ASEAN and a former High Commissioner of Singapore to India. We also have His Excellency Mr. Craig Hall with us, who is the Consul General of USA in Calcutta. He served in this area for many years and he knows it well. And of course, then in the chair we have Mr. Kondapalli, an Indian asset as far as China is concerned. So anybody who wants to make notes, please make notes to what they are speaking about, so that you will never hear them again, perhaps. Thank you. Shri Kondapalli, yours.
General Roy, thank you very much. Very good morning to you all. We have this session on the normative aspects and in terms of the India-China relations. But since the panel is also broad enough, we will possibly look at the broader issues of global order, regional order, what it means for China rise, India rise in terms of these global order. Now, Sinners had put up a new tradition for the chairpersons, which is that not just as a timekeeper, as the panel here, the monitor here does mention about, but also to be a moderator and a speaker on the subject. In that tradition, I thank the Sinners for inviting me to be the chair of this session. The global order, where the norms have been set in 1945 in terms of a new international order, a new liberal order, is composed of the United Nations system with its Security Council and the General Assembly. A set of principles under the United Nations Charter has been adopted and a mechanism evolved over a period of time. Security related aspects, the concern mainly of the Security Council, the permanent five, and you have the General Assembly looking at a host of issues. Then, as part of this order, we have also seen the military alliances like the NATO and Warsaw Pact or other alliances that came about as a realpolitik in the international system. You have alliances in Asia. You have, for example, the Soviet Union with understandings as well as alliances. With the Chinese first in 1949 in what was called as a leaning to one side policy of China towards the Soviet Union. Then you have also the US-led alliances with Japan, Korea, Singapore, a host of other countries in ASEAN region in 1960s. So that was one pattern of that order that came about in the international system since 1945. You have also in the financial and economic domain of the order, you have the IMF, World Bank, Bretton Woods institutions. There are a set of principles that evolved out of these, which include, for example, the free market economy, structural adjustments, and so on and so forth, as the system for the global international economic aspects. And as a result, we have the G7, which has been extended to Russia, again as part of the G7 plus one. Of course, Russia today with the sanctions after the Crimean situation, Crimean annexation, there has been some tension between the G7 plus one construct. Yet we have also seen the IMF in 2000 has been reorganized, and the voting shares of China and India were slightly incrementally increased to roughly about from 3% to about 6% for China, and from 2% to about roughly 3% for India. So in other words, even in the financial domain, economic domain, we have seen the order being tweaked in the recent rise of China and India. So the norms governing the financial related issues have also been changing. The G20 is one mechanism where you have also the order, the financial order, the economic issues were discussed, especially in the post-global financial crisis situation. So this is one set of issues in relation to the global and regional orders. Then you have also the globalization, ICT, information and communication technologies, as well as in recent times the rise of China and India, which have contributed to a change in the the demands for change in the global international economic and political orders, security orders. The BRICS countries, or RIC, Russia, India, China, or the other multilateral institutions that have come up, have been demanding much more space in that order. We have seen the BRICS summit meetings suggesting to the climate change related issues. You have also the IMF World Bank reorganization and on international security issues like Egypt, Libya, Syria, also North Korea, Iran nuclear program, a host of other issues. The BRICS have had some interventions in at least debating about that order. So we have seen in the recent times there has been some changes to that global and regional orders. Recently, we have a debate on what should be done about the global commons. For example, on the maritime domain, especially in terms of the UNCLOS, the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, there was some murmurs, especially after the PCA ruling in July 2016. There was the debate about freedom of navigation, rule of law on the high seas. These are now being revived, the debates are now being revived. You have one set of countries, at least, who have been observing the UNCLOS. While the United States had not signed the UNCLOS, yet it has been one of the major proponents of freedom of navigation over flights, as well as on the rule of law, maritime connectivity, maritime security, and so on and so forth. On the other hand, China had walked away from disposing before the Hague Tribunal when the Filipinos have gone to the court on 4 counts about the fishermen, the welfare of the fishermen of the Filipinos, secondly on the environmental degradation issues as a result of the expansion of the reefs through dredging projects and so on and so forth, especially on the environmental related issues. Thirdly, on the ownership of these reefs, because there were about 45 of such reefs which were occupied by different countries. Vietnam occupied the maximum number, China 9, Malaysia 9, Filipinos again some in the South China Sea. So this has become a contentious issue, ownership. So the PCA ruling suggested that you cannot draw the exclusive economic zone from the occupied reefs. These are not natural, which also then means the only one natural island in South China Sea, that is the Taiping Tao, also becomes a artificial kind of island in which you cannot draw the 200 nautical mile EEZ according to the PCA ruling. So this is one set. On the other hand, you have also seen 5 years ago, Bangladesh went to the Permanent Court of Arbitration for a ruling against the ownership of 2 islands contested with India. In the final outcome of this arbitration, India finally accepted the PCA ruling, suggesting to the adherence to the UNCLOS by India and also the rule of law, freedom of navigation, and a host of other issues. So this has now, the maritime domains have now become contested in the global commons. Interestingly, last week the Chinese have come up with an Arctic white paper in which they emphasize on the UNCLOS, while they do not emphasize on the UNCLOS ruling as far as the South China Sea is concerned, in which they suggest to the 9-dashed line of 80% of 3.4 million square kilometers of territory in the South China Sea. On the other hand, they suggest to the UNCLOS in the Arctic region. So this is the divergence that we have in the maritime domain. The two other global commons, that is the space and the cyber domains, have also now been increasingly getting contested. You may have seen that in the BRICS countries, Russia and China have been pushing for the cyber sovereignty issues, which India has some reservations on. And finally, the BRICS joint statements did not come up with the cyber sovereignty aspect because of the integrated nature of the globalization, ICT, and a host of other issues. The space also is one which is now increasingly being contested. There is a draft in the Geneva conference on this issue, which the Russians and Chinese are pushing forward on the weaponization and militarization of space. On these two related issues, there has been some debate, and this is a similar debate that we have seen in '92 when the NPT came up, Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty came up. If India does not take much active interest in this, it is likely that we also have the space-related issues of haves and have-nots and the discriminatory policies, as we have seen in the NPT regime, in the International Arms Control and Disarmament-related issues. So that's the broad template that we have on this. So in terms of looking at any country which accepts these normative related aspects, is the number one, is that country a status quo country, which means that it is a stakeholder, it does have some interest in this, in keeping the order intact, or is it a revisionist state? Revisionist state meaning that there are some aspects which are useful to the national interest of that country, some are not, or it wants to tweak the international order. Is China a status quo country? Is China a revisionist country? There is also a third dimension which nowadays is not part of the discourse, which is a revolutionary state. Remember in the 1960s, Chou En-lai, the premier, said he will set up a revolutionary United Nations, because China at that time was not a member of the United Nations Security Council till 1971. So these were the times when China did attempt to have a revolutionary order, a different order. So the debate at that time was the third world solidarity with the African, South American countries, association with the G77 countries, not formally but in ideological terms. So those were the debates that came about. So three aspects that could possibly look at the normative aspects. Are you a stakeholder in terms of a status quo country, or are you a revisionist country which wants to change the system but not entirely, structurally, but those which are related to, for example, the Chinese position on the IMF World Bank reform do suggest to a revisionist streak. Chinese position on the NSG or the 1267 Committee on Counterterrorism do suggest to revisionist tendencies. So this is a debate possibly is applicable to every other country in terms of that normative behavior. So we have a good panel which would look into these aspects. Let me welcome in the order that has been given to me, Ambassador Wong. The CVs have been circulated to all. We couldn't have expected a better speaker than Ambassador Wong, followed by Consul General Hall. So over to you, sir.
Thank you, Dr. Srikanth. I asked to come here because the hot and cold air is blasting at me over there. So I'm getting either a chill or sweat, depending on what kind of questions or issues you are throwing at me. First of all, let me thank the organizer for having me, especially Sinas. This is a great opportunity to come to your big city, Calcutta. It's always fascinating and nice to see many of you here. Some of you have known me for some years already. Today, I have been asked to talk about South China Sea, and thanks to Professor Srikanth. He has put out the basic concepts and parameters that cover most of my presentation. And maybe I should just highlight a few points from my perspective and put across some position with regard to ASEAN. If you look at my bio data, I used to be the Secretary General of ASEAN. It is called the Association of Southeast Asian Nations. It is not the wrong spelling for Asian. Some people mix it up, thinking that ASEAN is spelled wrongly because it should be Asian, the I instead of the E. But the association has been around for 51 years now, and it consists of all the 10 countries of Southeast Asia. There is one more country in Southeast Asia called Timor-Leste or East Timor, which is not yet a member of ASEAN. So, although we call ourselves the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, ASEAN, we have not yet covered every country in the region. But ASEAN has been around for 51 years, and in the 5 decades that we have been around, the issue of South China Sea has always been there in our agenda. Over the last 5 decades, we had various peaks, various spikes in tension. Then there have been long periods when things were just coasting along. In the last 8-9 years, things have become quite bad because the biggest country in our region outside of Southeast Asia, namely our neighbor China, has been asserting its position quite strongly across the whole region. And this come about, in my opinion, from 2009. 2009, there was a timeline for countries in the region in Southeast Asia to submit to a particular UN committee on what they call limitation or demarcation of continental shelves under the seawater. So basically, the Malaysian and the Indonesian and the Vietnamese took a very active role, and finally Indonesia set up their limits, the boundaries, and Malaysia and Vietnam came together to set out their common understanding of the limits of their continental shelf underneath the seawater. And they submitted this to the UN committee, and in reaction to that, the Chinese took a strong stand and claimed that for time immemorial, this body of water in the South China Sea has been historical water for China. I have on this very simplified map the 9 dashed lines, the red line basically showing the area claimed by China. So Chinese historians and Chinese scholars have stated very regularly that they have historical rights to this area from time immemorial. And this 9 dashed line, however, has come about only in the late 1940s. And for a long time, they did not publish these exact lines in any form of official document. But because they need to respond to the Malaysian and Vietnamese submission to the UN Committee on Delimitation of the Continental Shelf, they put this out and officially circulated it as a Chinese document. And as you can imagine, after that, this whole region called South China Sea is now supposedly under China. China has historically asserted claim to some of the special features there. This is not drawn according to scale, it's just to show you the cluster of islands in the northern part called Paracel and then southern part called the Spratly. Yeah. But they have, before 2009, never really said that all the water within this 9 dash line belong to China or under Chinese influence. Now, this is completely wants to get into this body of water should do certain things which they claim according to the international law. So ASEAN, as you can imagine, we are the association of countries in this region, and all this whole chunk of South China Sea is in the middle of our regional body. So we have responded what we call calmly, yet legally, and in accordance to the rules that we know. Why do we have to take this position? Of course, in ASEAN we have 4 countries, namely Brunei, Malaysia, Vietnam, and the Philippines, which have overlapping claims with the Chinese claims. But beyond that, I think ASEAN's position is that this is a very important body of water, and whatever we wish to do about this place, we have to go by what existing norms and law that we have. So I try to put in a few points the importance of the South China Sea, but beyond this, as I mentioned, there is this body called the Association of Southeast Asian Nations. You can imagine the different diverse countries in the group, and over the last 51 years, what ASEAN had tried to do is to say that as a group, we come together, work together, cooperate in a peaceful, stable way, don't allow our historical, cultural, religious, language, and other kind of differences to divide us. And one of the things that we had done quite well until 2009 was we worked with all the big powers which have interest in this region, in Southeast Asia, China, India, Japan, USA, Russia, in a manner which these big guys outside the region somewhat respect the ASEAN position. And in the case of ASEAN, we try to be as neutral as possible. We understand the interests of all these big powers from outside the region. We try to work with these activities and interests of the big powers. So ASEAN created many different mechanisms. We have the ASEAN Regional Forum, we have the East Asia Summit, we have ASEAN Plus say India or ASEAN Plus China, ASEAN Plus USA, ASEAN Plus Japan kind of meetings and mechanisms. All in all, the whole idea is to get everybody into working with the Southeast Asian country in a peaceful, predictable way. We call all these activities the mechanism for regional architecture, regional security architecture, or regional economic architecture. And we thought that we did quite well, and we use this particular phrase called ASEAN centrality as a kind of shorthand to describe all things that we have done with the big powers with specific interests in Southeast Asia. But as a result of China's position that this body of water in the South China Sea belong to them, or they have historical rights and other influences in this area, the impact on the other big powers has been significant. The United States of America has always been in the region. In fact, ASEAN has always recognized the US as part of the Asia Pacific. Then we have India, we have Japan, and although Russians are not very prominent, but they have always been there. So, in this struggle for respective position, the concept of ASEAN centrality, which is a good way to manage everyone's interest, has now become undermined, and along the way, things have started to affect our ASEAN member states, and the confidence that we we have as a grouping of 10 to manage such kind of what we call external influences and impact on Southeast Asia has become more difficult, and in some cases very difficult to even come together on some common statements or wordings of ASEAN documents. So that is the strategic impact of what has happened in South China Sea on ASEAN. ASEAN unity has always been very what we call weak, in the sense that there are so many differences among ourselves. But through the years, we somehow put together for the bigger strategic gain of having all these big powers working together in Southeast Asia without one guy going to pull some smaller countries in Southeast Asia to their side or vice versa. But this South China Sea dispute have undermined this concept of centrality and the confidence which ASEAN countries have to manage our respective intra-ASEAN relationship as well as our respective ties and relations with big powers. This is just to tell you what the 4 countries in ASEAN has with regard to their claims in the South China Sea. I mentioned 4 of them. The ASEAN countries which don't have any claims, including, say, Singapore, how do we deal with this problem? Since 1992, ASEAN countries have been talking to the Chinese side to find ways to manage these kind of differences. So after many years, we arrived at one particular milestone called the DOC, Declaration on Conduct of Parties in the South China Sea. We call it a declaration because there was no political will to establish any legally binding arrangement to talk about cooperation between ASEAN and China on all these issues in the South China Sea. Political development at that time in China was not conducive for ASEAN to insist on having a treaty or a legally binding code. So DOC came about, signed by China and ASEAN in the year 2002. And in the DOC, we say we shall continue to work towards a code of conduct, which basically means a legally binding agreement between ASEAN and China. But since 2002 till now, we have not been able to come to any conclusion. And in the process, the Chinese position has been that there is no need for China to talk to any of the non-claimant countries in ASEAN. They only wish to talk to the 4 guys that have overlapping territorial disputes in the South China Sea to China, namely Brunei, Philippines, Malaysia, and Vietnam. So going forward now, in the past few years, we have managed to bring the divergence closer together. And now we have come to a kind of agreement, China and ASEAN, that we will work towards a code of conduct. Hopefully, in the coming years, we can settle this code and deal with all these specific issues over the South China Sea. In the meantime, as we are negotiating, we in ASEAN acknowledge that there will be specific situations when you need a certain way to deal with, say, Chinese Coast Guard vessels encountering a Philippine naval boats or some other ASEAN military assets. So we come to a thing called the CUES, which is Code on Unplanned Encounter at Sea. Those of you who are naval officers will understand this concept, where 2 sides come together to say, when we come across a particular situation where we both have our respective position and we cannot give way to whatever, how do we deal with it? So CUES is a kind of arrangement between ASEAN and the Chinese side as well as some other naval powers that will come into our region to manage these potential problems where both sides refuse to budge. The other thing that we have is to have a hotline between the Foreign Ministry of China and the Foreign Ministry of ASEAN countries. And hopefully, if there is a situation where both sides refuse to budge in the South China Sea, they can make a phone call to the Foreign Minister, and the Foreign Minister of ASEAN, whichever country is involved, they can contact the Chinese counterpart to calm things down. So, as we continue to talk about the code of conduct, we are having this kind of what we call interim or specific measures to manage the situation as we see it on the ground. Hopefully, this will be adequate for now. But in the meantime, as I mentioned earlier, the United States of America and other big countries, external powers, continue to move in the South China Sea. And how do they deal with China and Chinese Coast Guard vessels coming into the way of the other naval boats? So we still have an issue there, and this will continue to trouble us. And from time to time, the US conduct its freedom of navigation operations, and you see Chinese reaction in the media. The last point I want to make is about what we can do going forward. Really, we now have to sit down and talk, but there is a big gap, because how do we get a legally binding code? China and ASEAN, I think, have not yet even imagined that this gap can be closed. Two, ASEAN has the DOC with China. I think for the code of conduct, the China side is thinking of just confining all this kind of territorial dispute between China and those 4 ASEAN countries that have specific claims or overlapping claims in China. So, this code of conduct, what will it be called? Is it ASEAN-China Code of Conduct on the South China Sea? Or just simply Code of Conduct on Behavior in the South China Sea? The DOC, as I mentioned, is called ASEAN-China Declaration of Conduct Party in the South China Sea, and we expect the code to be so-called ASEAN-China Code of Conduct in the South China Sea. The last point about this code is, what is the coverage, the geographical coverage? Is it like what we have seen just now, covering this area inside the 9-dash line, or only with regard to specific islands and reefs that are claimed by different countries? And how does this affect other countries having shipping and naval activities through this region? So these are still issues not yet resolved, and we will probably continue to discuss. And all I can say is that going forward, we just really have to hope for the best, use what we know are the existing rules and norms to try to bring convergence to this big gap that we have. I will stop here now, and maybe later on we can take some questions and comments. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Ong, for bringing all those uncertainties, the debates, negotiations within the ASEAN for a potential code of conduct institution. I have a query, which is, what is the ASEAN's position on the newly formed Quad with the quadrilateral? Will the members of the ASEAN join the Quad in future for those 6 parameters which were mentioned in the November 11 discussion on rule of law, freedom of navigation, and overflight, maritime connectivity, maritime security, and the other 2? this could probably be discussed in the. Now let's move on to the other major intervention on coming together of the ASEAN and new force in the South China Sea by Mr. Kreita.
Professor Kundapalli and Ambassador Ong, it's a real honor to share the dais with you, so thank you for the opportunity. And to Centers K and the organizers, thank you for inviting me to participate, and other distinguished guests and visitors who are here, thank you for the opportunity. So I'll look from a U.S. perspective at the issue of ASEAN and echo many of the things that Ambassador Ong spoke about. But first let me address the question of why is the United States here, and is the United States really an interested party, and what is the United States' interest in relationship to ASEAN and to the South China Sea. The United States recognizes that America's future prosperity and security are inextricably tied to the Indo-Pacific. And the United States' vision is an Indo-Pacific that is open, prosperous, and secure. President Trump has identified this vision as of vital importance to the United States. Geographically, and thinking of Lieutenant General Mukherjee's comments yesterday about the importance of geography, geographically the United States is a Pacific nation. America's Pacific coastline is more than 7,600 miles long, and in comparison, America's Atlantic coastline is just over 2,000 miles long. Nowhere in the world are the United States' economic and strategic opportunities clearer or more compelling than in the Indo-Pacific. The Indo-Pacific region is home to 4 of America's top 10 trading partners. It's home to 5 of America's 7 treaty alliances. So the United States has treaty alliances with Japan, Korea, Thailand, Australia, and the Philippines. It's home to the world's largest and fastest growing economies, including 40% of overall global growth, and nearly 2/3 of the global middle class is in the Indo-Pacific. So when America looks at the Indo-Pacific, and we think about India's place in the Indo-Pacific, and we think about America's relationship to India, India is a vital partner. Secretary of State Rex Tillerson recently said, and I quote, "The emerging Delhi-Washington strategic partnership stands upon a shared commitment to upholding the rule of law, freedom of navigation, universal values, and free trade. Our nations," he said, "our 2 nations, are 2 bookends of stability on either side of the globe, standing for greater security and prosperity for our citizens and people around the world." So when the United States looks west to see the Indo-Pacific, we see India. And we think that when India looks east to see the Indo-Pacific, India sees the United States. America also regards ASEAN as an indispensable partner in the Indo-Pacific. ASEAN integration and connectivity remain central to stability in the Indo-Pacific and to our engagement with the region, to the extent that it's difficult to imagine stability in the Indo-Pacific without ASEAN acting as a cohesive body. A prosperous, strong, integrated, and unified ASEAN is good for the people of Southeast Asia and the larger region. It's also good for the United States, and it's good for the world. So towards fulfilling that vision and in way of supporting ASEAN, the United States remains committed to ASEAN centrality and to its pivotal role in convening the states of the region. The U.S.-ASEAN partnership is now in its 41st year, 41 years. It has grown from a single annual dialogue to now what we call a strategic partnership, which we established in 2015. The United States works with ASEAN on a wide range of political, security, economic, and socio-cultural issues. And in fact, in 2010, the United States established a U.S. mission to ASEAN and named a U.S. ambassador to ASEAN. And that mission sits in Jakarta, which is where the Secretariat General of ASEAN is located. In cooperation with allies and like-minded partners, including Japan, Australia, India, and many ASEAN members, the United States continues to work with ASEAN in ASEAN-centered fora, such as the East Asia Summit and the ASEAN Regional Forum, to ensure regional security and to codify respect for international law. And ASEAN has to be at the center of that effort. From an economic perspective, from a U.S. economic perspective on ASEAN, U.S. companies invest more in ASEAN member states than in any other part of Asia. So the current estimate of U.S. private sector engagement or investment in ASEAN member states is now $274 billion, which is more, in fact, than America's investment in China, India, and Japan combined. Now, to protect that prosperity and to ensure our continued growth, the United States is redoubling its cooperation with ASEAN on issues of regional security. Because frankly, the stability of the region is under threat. The menace and the reality of global terrorism is one threat that challenges not just the ASEAN region, but all of us. Another threat that ASEAN is grappling with is China's provocations in the South China Sea that threaten the peace and stability of the region. China's efforts to build and militarize outposts in the South China Sea endangers the free flow of trade, threatens the sovereignty of other nations, and undermines regional stability. China is provoking other states in ways that put strains on the global systems, and its actions also undermine core principles of sovereignty. So if you think of Ambassador Ong's map of the South China Sea and the 9-dash line, China is literally taking concrete steps by constructing outposts where there was nothing, and then militarizing those outposts with airstrips and weapons. And it's difficult for us to grasp because you think of the issue at Doklam, that was hard enough because none of us in this room could see it. We know where it is and it's close and but we can't see it, but yet it's somehow more real because we can imagine a boundary. But when you're talking about the open ocean like the South China Sea, we don't see it, and it's difficult to imagine. But China is dredging and building military outposts to secure their vision of that 9-dash line. The United States has a long-standing and abiding interest in the South China Sea. And the United States has been clear with all parties in the region that America does not accept unilateral actions by claimants aimed at changing the status quo while issues of sovereignty remain unresolved. Meaningful, legally binding codes of conduct developed in accordance with international law are essential to allow countries to ensure their own security and to respond quickly to disasters and those codes of conduct would help keep sea lanes open for the movement of increasingly high volumes of trade. A secure and stable regional environment sets the table for the type of sustainable economic growth that lifts people out of poverty and into the middle class. The 2016 ruling in the Permanent Court of Arbitration Tribunal on the South China Sea, from a U.S. perspective, remains binding on all parties, and we've encouraged the parties to lawfully resolve differences regarding maritime disputes. And the court rejected China's claims to the outpost that were in question in the South China Sea. The United States will continue to work closely with ASEAN to promote peace and stability in the South China Sea by upholding a rules-based order, ensuring the lawful and unimpeded flow of commerce, and encouraging the peaceful and diplomatic resolution of disputes. And echoing what Ambassador Hong said, ASEAN is attempting to negotiate a code of conduct with China to peacefully resolve disputes over sovereignty in the South China Sea. The United States welcomes and encourages inclusive dialogue, but we remain seriously concerned by China's ongoing construction and militarization of disputed outposts, and the United States has called on all claimants to cease such activity, especially given the ongoing discussions on the Code of Conduct. Member states of ASEAN should have an opportunity, free of coercion, to negotiate a Code of Conduct with China. The United States believes that India has an important role to play in ensuring the peace and prosperity of the Indo-Pacific, and particularly by developing relations with ASEAN and its member states. So the United States was very happy to see Prime Minister Modi's invitation to the heads of state of ASEAN to Republic Day, and welcomes very much India's efforts to further extend its relationships in Southeast Asia and among ASEAN member states. People in this room would be well aware of India's many interests in Southeast Asia and with ASEAN member states. India is connected geographically to Southeast Asia and to many ASEAN member states, connected by land and by sea. By trade, ASEAN-India bilateral trade grew from less than $3 billion in 1993 to more than $56 billion in 2016. So trade is growing, but it's not yet significant enough. Indian exports to the 10-nation ASEAN bloc are expected to reach, or could reach, $280 billion by the year 2024, according to a Standard Chartered Bank research report. So in 2014, Indian exports to ASEAN were $33 billion, and reports have assessed that that figure could increase dramatically in just a few years to $280 billion. India depends on the free flow of commerce, particularly energy, through the South China Sea. India is already engaged in ASEAN institutions, including the ASEAN Regional Forum, the Asian Development Bank. India, like the United States, is an ASEAN dialogue partner. And if we look geographically again, and our Navy colleagues here would know better, but the Andaman and Nicobar bases are closer to Myanmar, Thailand, Malaysia, Singapore, and Indonesia than they are to the Indian mainland. And A role that the United States would like to see India play with ASEAN is to support ASEAN as a balancer for China's influence in the region. In conclusion, the subtitle to today's panel, and my part of it, is Coming Together of ASEAN, a New Force in the South China Sea. From the perspective of the United States, it would be good for the region and the world if ASEAN were a new force in the South China Sea. But the path forward is complicated, in no small measure because of China's provocations. The United States and India have a role to play as stabilizing partners, as friends of ASEAN and its member states, to contribute to ensuring that ASEAN has the diplomatic and economic space to manage its negotiations with China in an environment conducive to maintaining peace and stability. ASEAN as a force in the South China Sea would put not only the member states of ASEAN, but the United States and India in a better position. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Hall, for giving us the United States perspective on the South China Sea as well as on the ASEAN as a balancer to China. Since we have some 16 more minutes, I would like to revert back to the speakers. First is Ambassador Wong, in terms of whether or any plans for the ASEAN as a whole, as a collective. You did mention about the ASEAN being divided since the Hanoi meeting in 2010 with no common joint statement, etc., especially on issues of South China Sea. In terms of any ASEAN as an institution or individually joining the Quad, or in terms of providing logistics facility or any other for the missions that it intends to conduct in these 6 parameters. What do you say?
Thank you, Dr. Srikanth. I mentioned just now about ASEAN centrality, which basically is our way of ASEAN countries, first of all, managing our own internal diverse views about big countries like US, China, India, Japan, and so on. And over the last 50 years, we developed various processes and mechanisms to engage all these external parties, people who are outside Southeast Asia geographically. So we try our best whenever there is a new way of looking at some of the challenges to bring more convergence, in the sense that we get different countries which have some bilateral relations with certain other powers to basically not dismiss some of these ideas, as long as they are all part of the process for peace and stability, security of Southeast Asia. So the centrality dimension of ASEAN is still an overriding way in which, or strategy in which we will manage our differences between ourselves as well as with the other countries. The latest development about Indo-Pacific concept has been discussed among the ASEAN leadership. Some of the officials have also been actively canvassing views across the region. But so far, we have not yet made a definitive statement with regard to this Indo-Pacific, except to reassert again the need for us to maintain peace and stability in the region and to work with all those countries that have interest in Southeast Asia. Yeah. The annual series of ASEAN meetings is just starting. This year, the chairman of ASEAN is Singapore. So next week, we are, in fact, tomorrow onwards, we are having the first sets of meeting, all the ASEAN countries coming together to look at some of these latest development and how we should position ourselves. But as a guiding principle, the centrality of ASEAN will continue to lead us in a manner which we stress repeatedly. We don't want to take side. We don't want to have any tension which will lead to unstable situation. The Indo-Pacific concept is not new, by the way. It has been around for quite some years. In its latest manifestation, the Quad has also been around for some years. In the past, we have discussed previous permutation of this concept. And if you look at a big country like Indonesia, Indonesia is the largest country in ASEAN. They have also been working quite actively in the past 4 or 5 years to take ASEAN centrality to another level. ASEAN centrality is basically, let's engage everyone, work together, and don't allow any particular party to sort of over-exert or disregard some other country's interests. So Indonesia has been quite actively promoting this idea of an Indo-Pacific treaty for peace, for cooperation. ASEAN has a treaty called Treaty of Amity and Cooperation, which means all of us in ASEAN have to subscribe to this, and other big countries, big power from outside Southeast Asia, when they want to conduct their official relationship with ASEAN, they will also accede to this ASEAN Treaty of Amity and Cooperation, like the United States of America, like India. So the Indonesian idea is to take that Treaty of Amity and Cooperation to make it into a broader Asia-Pacific form of cooperation and working in a very predictable and stable way. That had been discussed among ASEAN countries for the past few years. Now, the Indonesian government is also looking at how to resurrect some aspect of that debate and discussion, and to look at the latest Indo-Pacific concept and the implication of the formation or intensification of the Quad cooperation. So I would urge all of you to look at the coming meetings, and I'm sure there will be more discussion. But definitely, as far as Singapore is concerned, we feel that the discussion that is ongoing contribute to better appreciation of the value of the strategic value and the economic importance of South China Sea. And whatever we do, we should try to avoid any open confrontation, raising of tension, which will affect business and shipping and whatever that passes through the South China Sea. And underlying all this is really the notion of rule of law, what we already have in our conduct of interstate relations and relations between ASEAN and other big powers, which is in all the various agreements, international norms, and most importantly in the UN Convention on all the Sea. Because if you look at this huge thing called the globe, most of the Earth is covered by ocean, and there is only one big thing called the UN Law, the Sea Convention. Nothing else to govern shipping and conduct of activities by different countries across all these oceans. And everyone, since the 1980s, when the UN Law, the Sea Convention came about, have accepted that this would be the way to go, and elaborate mechanisms set up for doing this and that. And there's a thing called the International Seabed Authority, which is housed in Kingston, Jamaica. So all these things are there, and we should not minimize or reduce the importance and significance of all these regime or this rules-based mechanism. And everyone must accept that international relations will always be contentious in different form. And one way to manage all this is to resort to UN norms, UN rules, and international conventions like the UNODC.
Thank you very much, Dr. Kulan. Although we are spilling over into the next session, I would still like to raise a few queries to Mr. Hall. There is a view within the Asian countries that the Trump administration is following an isolationist policy with withdrawal from the TPP as well as climate change proposals. While Defense Secretary Mattis had reiterated the alliances with South Korea as well as Japan, there is still a lot of speculation regarding the US commitment to the Asian region. For example, the FONOPS, the Freedom of Navigation Operations that United States conducts, about 18, 19 a year on an average globally, but something like 15 are conducted in South America and about 2 to 3 are conducted in South China Sea, which suggests the focus of the US is still in the Monroe Doctrine rather than in the South China Sea. Of course, we have seen a qualitative difference in the Obama administration and the Trump administration FONOPS. The Obama administration has not gone up to the 12 nautical mile limit, but the Trump administration naval missions conducted recently have gone up to within the 12 nautical mile limits, thereby suggesting that China does not have effective sovereignty, military sovereignty in these islands or reefs that China had occupied. So number one is the US interest in this region, whether it is still intact, and what are the main formations of those interested in, because there is a view that US is distracted with the North Korean situation and has been paying less attention to the South China Sea or other related issues, number one. Number two, there is also the speculation within the Asian region that the G2 is intact since the Obama administration. The Trump visit to Beijing also had reinvented those notions of the G2, which was proposed way back in 2000s and has taken a lot of stock in the recent times. So the speculation regarding whether the G2 under the Trump administration, whether it has any strong features, this is a major concern in the Asian region about the US and China coming together to put up their position. The third is what it takes for the US to put the Chinese in a normative sense, what it takes for the US to cajole China in the observation of rules and regulations in the international system. Does the US have any things up its sleeve in making China observe the rules and regulations? Another set of questions is the Quad that has come about in November is still weak in terms of the individual states making individual statements, but not a institutionalized mechanism for the Quad. What are the measures that the US undertakes for institutionalization of the Quad? And the other one in relation to the Quad is it is still weak without any economic background for the Quad, as the TPP is withdrawn, the TPP is gone. The Quad doesn't have the economic muscle to reinforce itself. What are the measures undertaken in terms of the economic dimensions of the Quad between the 4 states and possibly with the regional? And finally, my query is what is the US policy in relation to the Asia-Africa Growth Corridor, which is a Japan-India initiative recently, and what does, of course there is between State Department, the Japanese MOFA and the MEA, there is some coordination in relation to Africa, but in relation to the AAGC, what is the US position regarding the strengthening of the AAGC program? Thank you.